the three meals. Okay, this is for first Shleima, for Shifra Simcha Bat Yeta, and all Chorim of Klal Yisrael. The three meals. Okay, it says in Shmos, in English, eat it today because today is Shabbos. Is Shabbos to Hashem. Today you will not find it, and it says, and that means the manna. You will not find it in the field, because you had to pick it up erev Shabbos, and that's what you had. You collected your portion, and that covers you for Shabbos. Today is mentioned 3 times in the verse, from which the Talmud derives the duty to have 3 meals. These meals should consist of one's favorite dishes in honor of the holy day. In Hebrew it's called kavod v'Shabbos. It's a mitzvah to prepare hot food before Shabbos so that one may enjoy a warm meal on Shabbos itself. It is not only an oneg, but it also demonstrates one's acceptance of the rabbis, who oppose the Karaites' view that only cold food may be served. One may be sure to comply with the rules on keeping warm food. This will be discussed later. So the Karaites interpreted things. It's a sect, and I know someone who's dating a person in Israel whose fathers are Karaite. They're actually from Egypt. They were Jews from probably mainly Cairo, and they took things literally. So they don't use electricity, and they eat cold food, and they take it. They don't interpret it correctly, and they're a very weird sect. I mean, most of them are not that. They wouldn't be Dati, but there are some that still exist today, by the way, in Israel. But it's like, to me, it seems like a cult in a way, the way they interpret things. It's not normal. It's not normal, and you can't enjoy the part of the purpose of Shabbos is to enjoy yourself, to have oneg.
But it might be part of their customs. Then it's maybe different. I'm not sure. I agree with you.
They're taking it literally, but it's but you're allowed to use electricity if you use a time switch, and you're allowed to have hot food as part of the enjoyment. There are ways and means to be within this parameters of halacha, and to not break Shabbos. So that's the story.
Oscar, thank you.
Shkach, Kev.
A nice example you brought in there.
I mean, aren't you guys used to on Shabbos having it the Kerach way with no electricity or anything?
What?
Aren't you used to South Africa not having electricity on the Saturday? So I mean, the Kerach experience.
Yeah.
But we pretty much have cold food every day, yeah.
Except after we go much more machmir, as Gavin said, we observed that no electricity day every day, and we've got very little water. No, I'm not joking. We had to take water from the pool at my brother's place to put it in the loo because the toilets weren't flushing. There was no water. Yesterday.
Serious? Oh my gosh.
So welcome to Africa. Pay your taxes and have a nice day. All right, and on that blessed note, let's get started. And in fact, Kev, well explained, man. Very well explained.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Can I get started here? I just want to share my screen. We're just going to go through the Mishnah. Art, will you read?
Okay. The Mishnah discusses a scriptural passage concerning a tam that gourds. If an ox that is worth 200 zuz gored another ox that is worth 200 zuz, and the carcass of the gored ox is worthless, Rav Meir said, concerning this case it is stated, they shall sell the live ox and divide its money. Rav Yehuda said to him, the halacha is indeed so. However, by interpreting the verse thus, you have fulfilled only the directive. They shall sell the live ox and divide its money. But you have not fulfilled the additional directive, and the dead one too they shall divide. But which is the case that the verse refers to? Is it the case of an ox worth 200 zuz that gored another ox worth 200 zuz, and the carcass is worth 50 zuz, in which one takes half of the live ox and half of the dead one, and this one takes half of a live ox and half of a dead one?
Good. Well read, mate. All right. So just want to make things a couple of clear. There's an argument between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Before we get into the specific argument, what they wanted to do is there's a discussion in terms of what Pasha is relevant from the Torah with regards to the Mishnah they're quoting. So we're going to go into this. So obviously, Rabbi Meir is talking about the exact Pasha verse, the scriptural passage that says, if an ox that is worth 200 zuz gored another ox that is worth 200 zuz, and the carcass of the gored ox is worthless. Now, Rabbi Meir says, stop right there. We're not talking about this verse, because although you fulfilling the instruction to sell the live ox and divide its money, the statement they shall, and the dead one too they shall divide. He said it cannot be talking about that as the particular verse. So it must be talking about another scriptural source, meaning that the carcass has to be worth something. And in this particular case that he's bringing is that the carcass is in fact worth 50 zuz, because he said it's the only way you can fool that directive. He's not saying that in every case you can fool that directive, but he says the biblical example that is in fact quoted in Exodus has to fulfill that particular verse. If it doesn't, then you've got an issue. The verse is Shmot, Exodus chapter 21, verse 35, and it carries on to verse 36. So he said the prime arc or case has to deal with the case of dividing the carcass, otherwise it can't be used as the scriptural example. So what we discussed this the other day, is there's two ways that you can interpret it. The first way that you can interpret it, when you say, in which this one takes half the live ox and this one takes half the dead one, and this one takes half the live ox and this one takes half the dead one. There are two very simple ways you can work it out. And we're going to say who has the opinion of who. So the first way is quite clearly, this is just a revision of Thursdays. We can say, look, the live ox is worth 200 zuz. The carcass that remains of the dead animal is worth 50 zuz. The difference between the live animal and the dead animal is 150 zuz. And therefore, since the owner, it's the first three occurrences, he's not expected to look after the animal and pay full payment damages in the same manner. And since that is the case, we see that although he would owe 150 zuz from choice property or cash equivalent, if this was a habitual goring ox, in this particular case, it's time, he doesn't owe 150. What does he owe, guys? 75, exactly. So that's the clearest way to work it out. There's another way to work it out. It's the combination of the two, which is what Gavin mentioned the other day. I mean, you can work out the combination of the two in two different separate ways, but the bottom line is the living ox is the ox that you're about to sell together. The attacking ox, the living ox, is worth 200 zuz. The carcass of the dead ox is worth 50 zuz. So that equals 250 zuz, right, guys?
Good.
So then we're saying in that case, you split the value of the living ox, the attacking ox that you're going to sell as partners, according to Rabbi Akiva, or the base din will make you sell it together. And then the carcass itself you shall sell and split the proceeds together. So 250 zuz divided by 2 is what?
125.
125 zuz. Fine. So it means I, as the Reuven, as the owner of the attacking ox, keeps 125 zuz, and the damaged party keeps 125 zuz. Now you're saying, hang on, that seems more than the 50s, the 75 zuz. It's not. Let me tell you why it's not. It's because if he got paid only the difference between 200 zuz and the 50 carcass, he would have been eligible for 150 zuz if it was more, but now he gets 75 at a time, plus his carcass, if he gets to keep it, is worth 50. So 75 and 50 is 125. So the damaged party still gets 125. The person that's selling his live ox that's worth 200 zuz, he's selling it and he only has to give 75 out of the 150 damage to the damaged party. Therefore, for 200 minus 75 is 125. So he gets to keep 125 zuz. So the math works out identical. So you might say, why go through the semantics of, okay, maybe the one rabbi interprets it as the difference between the living ox and the dead carcass. And the one says, no, you take them combined and you sell it and you say, so what's the difference? We come to the same mathematics. There is a difference. The difference is going to play out in depreciation and appreciation, number one. But in the subject of appreciation, it's going to manifest where the carcass is worth more than the attacking ox. It's possible. We'll go through some examples. Or alternatively, that there's an appreciation of the value of the goring ox. So we're going to go through different examples that if it's not interpreted the same, it's going to have massive consequence. So that's when the math is going to make a difference. Here, the math works out perfectly well. Why? The attacking ox is worth 200 zuz. The damaged and dead ox was worth 200 zuz. So the math is equal. The minute the attacking animal is puny or massive, or the carcass is puny or massive, that's when your factors are going to change. Hope I made that clear. Let's get cracking. All right. So we're on 34a3. So the Gemara now says, all right, let's untangle this. There's a brisa in which Rabbi Meir responds to Rabbi Yehuda's challenge. The rabbis taught him a brisa, if an ox worth 200 zuz gored another ox worth 200 zuz, and the carcass is worth 50 zuz. This one, what do they mean this one? The damager takes half of the live ox and half of the dead one. And this one, the damaged party, takes half of the live ox and half of the dead one. And this is the case of the ox that gored that is discussed in the Torah. So the first case that we have is Rav Yehuda. And Rav Yehuda says what we do in the financial calculation is we take the living ox, in other words, the attacking ox, and because we have to sell it as partners, me as the damager and you as the damaged party, and we have to split that. Now the carcass, we split as partners as well. So that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, and he says this is the scriptural verse. Rabbi Meir says no, that's not the case from the scriptural verse. What he's saying is, so he's not arguing of the fact that it's not the 50 zuz. I think they're both in agreement that it's the case of the 50. We'll see now. Rabbi Meir says this is not the case that gored, that is discussed in the Torah. He says, rather, if an ox worth 200 zuz gores another ox that is worth 200 zuz, and the carcass is worthless, concerning this case, it is stated they shall sell the live ox and divide its money. Now, you're going to have a problem here with Rabbi Meir. Guys, what do you think the problem is going to be?
What, we're selling the live ox?
No. Listen, Rabbi Yehuda's case, I'm going to explain this again, Gav. Rabbi Yehuda's case is saying, look, there is a scriptural reference to the Torah. The attacking ox, the damager's ox is worth 200 zuz. The damaged party's ox is worth 200 zuz. And I'm coming right now, Kev. And the carcass remaining is worth 50 zuz. That's what Rabbi Yehuda said is the classical scriptural reverse when it talks about in Exodus about dividing the live ox and the dead ox. This is the primordial case, okay? But that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Now, so far, Rabbi Yehuda makes sense. Rabbi Meir, we have a question on, because Rabbi Meir says no. The case in the Torah is that when the attacking ox is worth 200 zuz, the damaged ox, the dead ox now, we should say, is worth 200 zuz, and the carcass is worth 0. So Rabbi Meir, you should have a question, guys, if you did any chazorah on Rabbi Meir. What's the question?
Well, Rabbi Meir is not dealing with, he's only dealing when the amounts are exactly equal. He's
No,
not
so is the other. So is the other, because just hear this. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda don't disagree when the amounts are equal. They're both saying the attacking ox is worth 200 zuz. The dead, the ox that was gored is worth 200 zuz. They're arguing on a different point. The one says the scriptural verse, Rabbi Yehuda, when the carcass is worth 50 zuz, and Rabbi Meir says it's when the carcass is worthless. So we don't have a question on Rabbi Yehuda so far. We have a question.
Okay, I've got it. Rabbi Meir is saying that But I had it. Hold on 1 second. I've lost it. Just carry on. I had it. Got
Can I say
Damon.
something which may...
Kevin, go
Absolutely,
ahead.
Kevin. Rabbi Meir, take it away.
Okay, Rosh Hashanah Talmudim. The carcass is the damaged part is going to be losing out because it's only going to get half the value of the live ox after they sell it, and the carcass has lost value. He's going to lose money there.
No, we're not there yet. I'm pleased you did Chazorah. Excellent, you have done Chazorah. I can see that. But what is the issue here?
Well, wouldn't it be, James, that if the ox is worthless, they're not going to include it in the equation, and the actual damage is going to, the guy who's got the damaged ox is actually going to gain because he keeps the ox with 50 zuz, so he gets 50 zuz more.
No, you're not there yet. I'm so pleased
Okay.
you guys have all done Chazorah, which is beautiful. We're just talking in the present. So let me give it to you, but I'm pleased you guys know. The big problem we have with Rabbi Meir at the moment is we're saying, well, how do you explain the word, and the living ox they shall divide, and the dead ox they too shall divide? We cannot explain it on an example where the carcass is worthless. That's our question now to Rabbi Meir. If Rabbi Meir verse, the classical biblical verse is where the carcass is worthless, we say, well, how do you explain the verse? That's the problem. To divide the carcass, because there ain't a carcass to divide. It is worthless. It has no value.
So he might not have, his opinion might not be to divide that carcass.
No, it has to be, because that's the biblical instruction. So he has to explain it.
But he's dealing with but he doesn't seem to be tackling the fact that it's zero. He doesn't seem to be dealing with the sharing of the carcass itself.
Okay, but no, that's fair enough. But he has to explain it, because
yes,
the biblical instruction is very, very clear. And since the biblical instruction in Shemot 21 verse 35, chapter 21 verse 35, and if a man's ox shall push the ox of his fellow and it dies, they shall sell the live ox and divide its money, and the dead one too they shall divide. That is an instruction from the Torah. So now both the rabbis are saying, well, what case is explained in the Torah? Rabbi Yehudi, we understand, because the carcass is worth something. So there's something to divide. A carcass that is worthless, there's nothing to divide. So what does this mean? So that's what his explanation is to be. So guys, what I'm asking you as follows is that when you're learning Gemara, there's two ways to learn it. We all are all analyzing the dead frog here. What do I mean by the dead frog? Think of it in biology, when biology was, a compulsory subject in Standard 7. We all had to dissect the frog, right? So we all have the same Mishnah and Gemara to dissect, as Rabbi Cohen says, and he uses the example of dissecting the frog. The more you get into Gemara, the more you go from using a machete to using a scalpel to using a microscope. So that's when your skills develop. Do you get what I'm saying? That when you're learning a daf, you're asking yourself these questions. And it's going to come, guys. It's really going to come. So I was onto something, but what I was looking for was the fact that at the end of the day, we were dealing with an issue that we have to ask, how does Rabbi Meir use that example when there's no carcass that's worth something? How does he explain the dividing of the dead ox? Okay, so concerning this case, it's stated they shall sell the live ox and divide its money. But how will I explain the directive, and the dead one too they shall divide? This means that the depreciation that death caused to the gored animal, they divide in the value of the live one. What are we saying? In other words, the damaged party is reimbursed for half of the difference between the value of the animal during life and its value after death through the sale of the live ox. So what we're actually saying, guys, is that if you... Amen. So what we're actually saying is that it doesn't mean that the damager physically takes half the carcass and sells it. He has actually no stake in it at all. The only thing it means is that the loss in the value of the dead animal is assessed and the damager pays half of it. So what do you mean half of it? They take the difference between the live animal's value and the dead carcass animal value, and he pays the difference divided by half because it's tam. That's all it means. So Rabbi Meir is relatively easy to explain. he's saying, listen, it doesn't matter if I use the biblical verse that the carcass is worth 0, because whether it's worth 0 or it's worth 50 zuz, there's no difference. You take the animal worth alive, you take the animal's worth dead. If this animal happens to be worth nothing dead, so you don't get that benefit. If it's worth something dead, you pay the difference. And if it's time, you pay the difference divided by 2, based on the leniency of the body of the damaging animal. That's the long and the short of it. So, okay, that's fairly clear. And now we're going to Arthur's point, and I'm pleased all of you guys have done Chazorah. So before we get there, we're saying, all right, so the Gemara now analyzes this dispute. According to both Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, in the case where an ox worth 200 zuz goes another ox worth 200 zuz and the carcass is worth 50 zuz, and this one takes 125 zuz, and this one takes 125 zuz, and each of them suffers a loss of 75 zuz, which is half the amount of the damage. What then is it the issue between them? So what we're saying is here, Rav Yehuda obviously works the calculation a little bit differently. How does Rabbi Meir work the calculation? Difference between live animal and dead. If it's time, you divide it by 2. What does Rabbi Yehuda say? Listen, you take the carcass of the dead animal and you split that between the 2 parties. You take the attacking animal, which you sell, so the damaged animal owner can recover some of his losses, and he takes half, and the owner of that attacking animal takes half. So what happens is you have 200 zuz of the living attacking animal plus 50 zuz of the carcass, 250 divided by 2, and that's how Rabbi Yehuda. So again, Rabbi Meir, the difference between the living and the dead. Rabbi Yehuda, you take the living attacking ox and you add the carcass of the dead ox, you take that amount together, you sell that, you split it between you. You both at the same of 125 zuz, and you basically each take a knock of 75 zuz. Clear? We explained it before. Great. All right. So then what could possibly be the issue that Gemara is saying? Because the mass works out the same in this case. So an answer is proposed. Rav has said that the matter of liability for depreciation of the carcass after death is at issue between them. So Rabbi Meir holds that the depreciation of the carcass is entirely the damaged party's liability. Okay? Entirely the damaged party's liability. But Rav Yehuda holds that half the depreciation of the carcass is the damager's liability. So you can actually understand where they're coming from in that regard. Because if Rabbi Meir is looking at the difference between the living and the dead, he's not interested in them selling it. So why would the damager have any stake in the carcass at all? He's not selling the carcass. He's just paying the difference between the value of the living and the dead. Only in the case of Rabbi Yehuda, you're saying you take both the living attacking animal and the dead carcass and split it with the injured party, perhaps. That's what the Gemara is saying. The attacking party has some sort of, what do you call it, responsibility in terms of depreciation as a partner, as a business partner. Because you can't put it onto one side. That's where the issue. Now, what we are saying is that there is a bit of a complicated issue. Let me tell you what it is. If death itself depreciated the ox's value by 150 zuz, right? And the value of the carcass subsequently decreased by another 25 zuz before it was sold. Okay? Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda disagree as to who suffers the additional loss. Okay, so in other words, the carcass, in my example, was worth 50 zuz. And now because of depreciation, it's worth 25 zuz. Okay, so this is the case I'm talking about. So Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda go according to this. So Rabbi Meir says the carcass belongs entirely to the damaged party. Why, guys? I need you to explain to me why. It's one sentence.
The carcass belongs to Rabbi Meir. Belongs to the damaged body because if there's that's what he said. I mean, that's his philosophy. He takes
No. But why? Why?
Because it's negligence on the damaged party side.
No. We're not there yet. Let me explain why, Gav. Let me explain why. Because he only calculates the difference between the living and the dead, and says that the owner of the tam ox pays half. He's not talking about combining the value of the living animal and the dead. Rabbi Yehuda has to explain that since they're partners in the dead carcass and they have to sell it, the damager also has to take responsibility for the depreciation. Rabbi Meir says it's, you can just offset your loss. The owner of the attacking loss has nothing to do with the carcass other than offsetting his loss. That's all. That's it. So Rabbi Yehuda's reason is because they're partners in the living as well as the dead carcass. So that's the reason. Okay. Now, so according to Rabbi Yehuda, the damager takes half of the live animal and half of the dead one, and the damaged party takes half of each one. So that is, each one is considered to have a stake in the carcass. Thus, the damager is liable even for half the depreciation that occurs after death. This is according to Rashi and the Maharsha. Okay. So just know that although the Gemara has just stated that if the animal was injured by goring, continues to deteriorate after the goring. So I want to ask you guys a question here, right? So if we say, according to Rabbi Meir, that the damaged, injured party is now Kev, are you with me?
Yeah.
So what we're saying is here is that even though the owner of the dead ox is liable for the depreciation entirely, according to Rabbi Meir, why doesn't he hold for deterioration of the live ox that the damaged party has? Why does he make the damager liable? What I'm doing is I'm asking a question from the previous stuff with this, because what I'm going to start to do is get you guys to really think. And this answer is discussed by the Rashba and Tosfot and the Ravad. It's logical.
Is it time related?
It is time related. So what am I asking, guys? Let me repeat the question one more time. So what I'm saying is as follows, is that at the end of the day, we hold the damager liable for any deterioration of the damaged ox while it is alive. Okay? In other words, between the goring and the actual trial, if the animal deteriorates further, we hold the damager responsible. In the case where the animal's already dead and the carcass begins to deteriorate, according to Rabbi Meir, the injured or well, we can't say injured. Injured assumes it's alive. The dead ox owner is liable for the whole depreciation. So while in the case where the animal deteriorates while it's alive, it's the damager's problem. And when it's a carcass, it's now the damaged or owner of the dead carcass's owner's problem.
Because Rabbi, I'm backing today. Sorry, my concentration, but I know the
This is
answer.
both the opinion of Rabbi Meir. So why, according to Rabbi Meir, where the ox is deteriorating, we hold the damager liable, and in the case where the animal's already dead and the carcass depreciates, does he hold the damaged party liable for the depreciation?
Okay, so if it's alive, what happens is if that carcass, not its carcass, if the animal deteriorates, then it's a greater liability for the damager, because
yes, but why? Yeah,
because it's a greater liability because the animal deteriorated, got worse, so you can see the true damage that was caused. So the damage that was caused was greater than what was caused initially at time of the actual incident. So
okay, and then why don't we take that into account with the depreciation? In other words, after the goring, the animal is dead. Okay, and
no, I'm talking about when it's alive.
I'm asking you.
Okay.
I get that, Gav. I'm asking a specific question. Please hear the question. You answered part of it. Please hear the other part of the question. The other part of the question is, if you're correct in that basis, which you are, why do we not hold the damager liable for the depreciation and only the damaged party?
Yeah, that's what I was getting to that. So now when it comes to the damaged party, it's his response, it's negligence if he doesn't look after that carcass. It's his responsibility.
Yes, why?
Because it's his property.
I'll take that.
It's in his possession.
Yes, I'll take that. I think I would say that explanation is Kev, what were you going to say? I like it.
He's going to lose value on it if he doesn't sort it out and take it to sell it as soon as possible.
Okay,
Also,
so That's right. So Kevin and Gavin, that's exactly right. So let's just word it in two simple sentences. According to the discussion of the Rashba, the Ravad, and Tosfot, this is the bottom line, exactly as Gavin said. I'm just putting it in a summary. Gavin, you understood it. So did Kevin. So did Arthur. Is that at the end of the day, between the goring and the trial, if I injured your ox, and since I was the one that damaged it, any further deterioration as the attacker is now my responsibility, because it can be assessed and see that the animal has gotten worse. Gavin's completely correct. But when we're dealing with the dead carcass, the default position, this is the key point, is that it will deteriorate. It's not it might get better or it might deteriorate. In the case, the reason why we wait in the case of a trial with a damaged animal is it might get better, and this might, if the animal makes a full recovery, the damager doesn't have to pay a full recovery. Or if it gets worse, he has to pay the worse amount for the deterioration that is appropriate. However, the minute an animal is gored and it's dead, the default position is it is only going to get worse. So therefore, since everybody knows this, it's now the damaged party's responsibility, according to Rabbi Meir, to get rid of that carcass as soon as possible. It's no longer a question, will the animal recover or will it get worse? It's only at that point, if it gets worse, we hold the damager liable. But if it gets better, it's to the damager's benefit. So it's fair, absolutely fair. So Gavin...
So Damon...
So basically... sorry, Arthur, go ahead.
So in a nutshell, while it's alive, you have a stake in it. And when it's dead, you have a stake.
Exactly.
Exactly. Kevin woke up from that.
And you have to stake his claim, Arthur.
Yeah.
Kev, you need to we've heard it many times, everyone. But mine was good.
So, Gav, you got it. I just wanted you to articulate it, but you did well. You understood it completely, and I'm happy. And so did Kevin, and so did Arthur. So I just want to, now that point's given, I just want to give over this issue with regards to depreciation. So Rava said the matter of liability for depreciation, as we know, with Rabbi Meir, he said it's the damaged party. Rabbi Yehuda says they're both partners in the living and dead ox, and therefore it's the damager's liability. So Rava's explanation is refuted. Abaya said to him, if so, then we find that according to Rabbi Yehuda, okay, that a tam is more stringent law than a muad. Why? Because in regard to a muad, the law is that depreciation of the carcass is entirely the damaged party's liability. Whereas you say that in regard to a tam, Rabbi Yehuda holds that the damager is liable for half the depreciation. So what it's saying, guys, is say I've got a pit. Say I've got a pit and one of your animals falls into a pit and it dies. Now we learned what? Who's responsible for the depreciation?
The damaged party.
Correct. So we're saying that is in the case of muad. Where in the case of muad, why is it muad? Because remember, what's muad? There's only in the case of goring, keren, that there's a concept of tam and muad with regards to fire, with regards to Have, which is fire, with regards to Mave, which is man, with regards to shame in regal. Okay, all of these things, an animal is or a person is muad from the outset, even a pit. In other words, any injury you cause from these things, you pay full payment. And yet, because it kills the animal in this case, we make the damaged party, not the one that caused the death, liable for the carcass. So what's asked of Rabbi Yehuda here is it saying the argument basically that Abaya said to Rav is that your explanation can't be correct. Why is it not correct? Is because you actually, by your explanation, you're holding that as tam is more stringent than a muad. Because we learned in the case of pit, for example, that the carcass is entirely the damaged party's liability, whereas you saying because they're partners in the living and dead ox, because they're splitting the proceeds, now all of a sudden, according to your explanation of Rabbi Yehuda, you're saying that the damager is liable for half the depreciation. How could it be that a case of tam would hold the damager liable for more than a muad, because we've always found that muad costs the damager more than tam. In this case, you're saying that the tam is costing more because you now suddenly want him to pay for depreciation, which is never in the case of muad injuries.
So maybe that's done. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda is saying that because he wants both parties to sell their carcass immediately. It's to motivate them, because it's an incentive for both parties, because they both lose in that case. Whereby if you go according to Rabbi Meir, only the damaged party loses. So if the damaged party is lazy and he doesn't do anything about it, like this, they both land up ensuring that it gets sold. I'm just saying. I'm just taking
okay, listen, I actually hear it as a valid point. The truth of it is the reason why it's not valid, even though it makes logical sense, is that you would say that anybody that caused the death of your animal should have a moral responsibility to help you get rid of it. That would be the thought in every case, not just a tam in a muad. You know what I'm saying? In other words, even let's take muad. Let's take a muad ox. I'll prove it logically against what you're saying, Gav. My ox is a habitual damager. And since my ox is an habitual damager, I should be even more responsible in helping you get rid of the carcass, even though I'm paying cash, because my ox, I know it's a damager. In the time, I didn't know my ox would cause such a thing. With muad, I'm carrying around an animal that's very destructive, so I should even be more responsible in helping you get rid of the carcass. But we don't find that. That's the logical refutation against what you're saying. Do you get what I'm saying?
No, I just took a step. I understand.
No, I'm pleased you did, but I'm saying, does the logical refutation make sense to you?
Yeah.
Can you just go back one step? He was just asking me something. Sorry.
Sure. So, Kevin, what I'm saying is this. Gavin asked a good question. He said, look, at the end of the day here, that the person, that damager has to have some responsibility in helping the person that lost his ox get involved with getting rid of the animal, since they're partners, and they should both be involved in selling the carcass hurriedly so that neither party takes loss. And a buyer's response to Rava is, no, you can't have a case where a tam is treated more stringently, where the damager now pays for the depreciation, where in any other muad case, he doesn't. And especially if you take a muad ox, let's take a pit aside, let's take a muad ox that's a habitual gora. If my ox I know is dangerous and kills your ox, even more I should help you get rid of your ox and have you not lose money, because I'm far more responsible than if my ox has been tame and suddenly goes crazy.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying? So he's saying it doesn't make sense that for a tam, he's now bearing responsibility when it's a relatively first-time offense, or not often that the ox behaves like that. And yet, in the muad, we don't make him responsible for the depreciation. So the proof now, a buyer's going to get a response quickly. He's going to get a response of a rejection of what he's saying. He's saying, and if you will say that it is indeed that a tam is treated more stringently than a muad, according to Rabbi Yehuda, as we learned in the Mishnah concerning an ox that was guarded minimally and broke loose and gored another ox. Rabbi Yehuda said if the ox was tam, the owner is liable, but if it is muad, he is not liable. So he's saying, look, I can see already you're going to give me an objection. This is the objection, guys. He's saying that we're learning in the daf of Bava Kamma 45b, which we haven't gotten to yet, that if I did the minimal amount of guarding of my muad ox, in other words, I tied it and I didn't put much effort in, and it broke out and it attacked something, I'm not responsible for payment. But we learn that if you take the minimal requirement to tie up a tam ox, you're responsible for payment. So this is what a buyer is saying. Listen, I get, guys, you might argue that in certain cases, tam might be more responsible than muad. And he uses this example as saying, listen, we can understand that you're responsible for paying for a tam ox if you don't tie it up properly, but you're not responsible for a muad ox if you tie it up not properly. In other words, with minimal amount of effort. So he's saying, maybe this is an argument against me. This is what you might be thinking. Okay. You get what I'm saying? It's like Gavin's answer, that maybe there are cases where tam is more stringent than muad. So he's anticipating an answer, not like Gavin's, but similar. And Gavin would have used that answer had we got to the 45th daf, I have no doubt. But So he said, listen, there's one thing that you've got to understand. He's saying, in regard to the degree of guarding required, in other words, looking after your animal, there are verses written in the Torah which imply that a minimal degree of guarding does not exempt the owner of a tam from liability, but does exempt the owner from a muad of liability. Okay? But in regard to determining the payment required, have you ever heard Rav Yehuda say that a tam is treated more stringently than a muad? So what he's saying is, yes, it might be a case. It might be a case with regards to looking after the animal, because you have so many leniencies with the tam that if you fail to even tighten up minimally, they're going to tax you. They're going to make you pay. But with regards to actual payment, we've never heard of a case where a tam is treated more stringently than a muad. That's what he's saying. You can't confuse the issue of guarding with an issue of muad. So let me just give you a logic why it could possibly be. I'm just giving a logic. I haven't gone through that stuff yet. Why muad would be let off the hook to a certain extent is because the muad animal would pay, the owner of the muad animal would end up paying so much for this that it might make him much more, because remember what happens with the animal. Hang on a second. I'm just moving this cat away. All right. So, sorry, guys. Let me just move this cat away. All right. So, bottom line, guys, is what we're saying is that you cannot confuse a case of guarding an animal where the laws of tam are slightly more stringent than muad with the degree of payment. He said you will never find a case where, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that payment of a tam is more stringent than a muad. And he's saying the only reason it's regarding guarding of your animal is because there are verses written in the Torah. Okay. Now, Kev, do you have to go now?
Yeah, I do. Thanks. Cheers, guys.
All right. Cheers, bud.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers, Kev.
Yom tov. Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Kabb for your vote earlier.
All right. So, sorry, this cat is driving me crazy. All right. So what we're saying is, all right. So how do we learn this Rabbi Yehuda story? Gav, are you with me?
Yeah, I'm following 100%.
Sorry, man. All right. So while we learned in the opposite brisa, it might have been thought that so what we're saying is, hang on, there is a problem with this particular learning that that, in other words, if you work out that the damager is liable for depreciation, a buyer is going to show a flaw in the logic here. There is a flaw in the logic. Okay, so we're about to see why Arthur it can't be depreciation. Okay, just give me 1 sec. I want to gently move this cat away because it's by the. We learn in the brisa, it might have been thought that if an ox is worth a mana, Gordon ox that is worth 5 selam, and the carcass is worth a selah, so that the damage amounts to 4 selam. This one takes half of the live ox, and this one takes half of the dead one. And this one takes half of the live ox, and this one takes half of the dead one, even though the damaged party will thereby receive more than the amount of his loss. So what are we talking about? Let's take some conversion of currencies. Basically, how much is a manega? So we learned it once before.
Like 100 something.
Exactly, Gavin. Well remembered. It's 100 zuz. And how much is a seller?
I would guess 1,000, but I'm not sure.
No, it's four zuz. Okay.
Four
So
zuz.
let me not use the word selayim, selah, etc. Can I use purely zuz to do this calculation? It's a lot easier.
Yeah, it's quite confusing.
All right. Arthur, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Arthur, Shema, you're right. I mean, you look forward.
Fine, I'm just tired.
Yeah, you
All
look a bit dazed there.
So all right, Arthur. All right, shame, man. So Arthur, listen here. The ox that attacked is worth 100 zuz, right?
Okay.
And the ox, the ox that died, the injured ox, will we say now the dead ox is worth 20 zuz? Okay. So my ox is worth 100 zuz. It attacks Arthur's ox worth 20 zuz. And the carcass is worth 4 zuz. Okay. So what is the damage worth? What does Rabbi Meir say the damage is worth?
Is a tam the animal?
Yeah.
The animal's tam. So it's going to be 100 minus. What did you say? The bottom calculation?
No. Let me say it again. My fault, Gavin. Let me say it again. The
Yeah,
attacking ox is
Yeah.
worth 100 zuz. So that you leave out the picture for now. But Gordon Oxlade was worth 20 zuz, and the carcass is worth 4 zuz. So let's take 20 zuz minus 4 zuz. It was worth 20 zuz when it was alive, and it's now worth 4 zuz as the carcass. So what is, according to Rabbi Meir, you only have to pay
the difference.
in other words, if the animal was muad, you'd have to pay 16 zuz. Again.
So I would say it's 10 minus 4, it's 6.
No,
No, Kev, let's just say it again. No, Kev, just hang on a bit. The animal, while it was alive, was worth 20 zuz, the one that was attacked. Its carcass is worth 4 zuz. There's only, the difference between the living ox and the carcass now is 16 zuz. Okay? So what we're saying is here, if the ox was muad, the owner would have to pay 16 zuz, correct?
Yes.
Fine. So what we're saying is here, then if it was tam, the owner would have to pay how much?
8.
8 zuz.
I said 6. Okay, I miscalculated, but I was in the right
No, it's fine. It's 8 zuz, right? But what we're saying is there's a heck of a problem here. If they're going to divide the live carcass and the dead carcass, according to Rabbi Yehuda, and base it on depreciation, you've got a big problem. Why? Because the attacking ox is worth 100 zuz. So they split it. And the damaged party now gets 50 zuz from that, right? He gets half if it's done. Now, the difference is the carcass is worth 4 zuz. So he gets 2 zuz out of that. And the damager gets 2 zuz. So now he's gotten 52 zuz. So it's a problem. How can it that a ton injury get 52 zuz, and if the owner was muad, he'd only paying 16 zuz cash? There's something very wrong in saying that they divide the living and the dead animal.
Yeah, it sounds very problematic. Yeah.
Do you understand when it's problematic?
But I think it's primarily, because it's when the value is so excessive.
Correct, but that's what Abai is saying to Rava, is that the problem with working the case on the depreciation is that the minute the attacking animal is worth far more than the damaged animal, you're going to have a problem with depreciation. Does that make sense?
Correct. And the damager makes a, the damaged part, give me one second, the damaged party makes a profit here as well. It's ridiculous.
That's what they're saying. They're saying it's a problem because the damaged party is not allowed to make a profit. Is entitled to recover his loss.
Yeah.
Sorry, Arthur. Sorry,
James,
Arthur.
it's also more likely that a big ox is going to kill a small ox much easier than a small ox to kill a big ox.
He's right. Arthur's absolutely right. So the thing of it is, Arthur's right, is that in all
this is probably more common. Yeah.
It's much more common, and that's where there's a problem.
Arthur.
So to preclude this line of reasoning, you can say the following, okay? Why was a muad singled out by the Torah and discussed separately from a tam? Why? In verse 36, the tam was discussed. In verse 35, the muad was discussed. Was it to be more restringent regarding it? Was it to be more lenient regarding it? You must say that it was to be more stringent regarding it with respect to the amount of payment. For the owner of the muad pays full damages, whereas the owner of the tam only pays half. Therefore, say the following: if even the owner of a muad pays only that which the muad damaged, is it not certain that the owner of the tam, which is more lenient, will not pay more than the amount that the tam damaged? Perforce, the damaged party does not receive half the value of the living animal when that is more than the amount of his loss. So what the Gemara is saying in very fancy terms is exactly this, is that even if you want to say there might be a case that the tam pays as much as a muad, the whole reason that the biblical verse separated it is that there must be a difference in the rules between tam and muad. Otherwise, there wouldn't be it wouldn't be stated in a different verse entirely. And since this is the case, we would even say that the tam would never even pay as much as a muad. Otherwise, why separate it into two separate verses? But even if you want to say kol v'chomer that in certain cases it might, it certainly never pays more than the muad. And when we're using the tam calculation of selling the living and the dead animal, in this particular case, it works out that the owner of the animal pays 52 zuz instead of 16 if it was more. That can't be right. So
Can
what
I
we
ask you something? David, 1 second. Remember we did that thing whereby you limit something. So can't it be where if it's time, it's limited to where a muad would be less?
So what we're saying is it's more than just limited, is that even if you want to, yes, we're saying exactly that it's limited. You can't make a profit for it. It's limited to the damage caused. Exactly that. So we're saying you can't, the damaged party cannot make a profit out of it. It's limited to the damage caused. So obviously the discussion in a different daf, it would be, does he pay the full 16 zuz, which can't be right? Or does he pay half, which is 8, which can be right? Now we're also going to discuss a selection. Could it be that he pays 3/4 of the damage? Because we're going to learn a case when if you sell the living and the dead animal, the person recovers 3/4 of the damage. So do we say there's a case where the tam is only necessarily half? Or do we say that tam, as long as it's less than muad, can be 3/4? We're going to discuss that case next time. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right.